Germany says 3 Russian military planes were intercepted in international airspace. 3 Russian military planes flying without transponders were intercepted in international airspace over the Baltic Sea, German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said. 2 Sukhoi Su-27 fighters and an Ilyushin Il-20 aircraft were identified by the German and British Air Forces, and added several images of the planes flying to Twitter. In response to this development, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, in his latest statement said that no one can feel safe unless Russia is defeated and called for an end to the war with a new Nuremberg. Every manifestation of Russian terror, every day of aggression is an additional argument that all this must end at the court, in a new Nuremberg against fascism, against the destroyers of life and people, who used rockets against museums and guided bombs against churches. Russia must lose. The world cannot have any other goal, Zelensky wrote. 2. Ukraine's military says Russia is concentrating forces to attack Bakhmut. During a press conference at the Kyiv Press Center Wednesday afternoon, Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar said the Ukrainian military said Moscow was concentrating its forces on the offensive in the eastern city of Bakhmut, devastating, and thus reducing, even stopping, offensive activity in some other areas. She said the situation in Bakhmut changes hourly and there is a war for positions going on. The enemy is concentrating all his forces on Bakhmut, and in fact is not conducting such intense combat operations anywhere else. In Bakhmut in the last 24 hours, the Russians attacked our positions 23 times, fired 280 times with various artillery pieces and carried out 4 airstrikes. There have been 85 attacks and 20 gunfights in the Bakhmut area alone. Deputy Minister Hanna Maliar noted that Wagner fighters were no longer carrying out independent missions in Bakhmut. Airborne units of the invading army and special forces are being used more and more. Therefore, we see that the enemy's losses are very significant. Ukrainian artillery brigades are constantly involved in securing the supply routes into Bakhmut, while engineers are doing all they can to ensure that there are some lines of communication. Russian media outlets claim that the Ukrainian troops are continuing to withdraw from the areas of Bakhmut and have destroyed the communication tower to the west of Bakhmut. Deputy Minister Hanna Maliar has denied this. Southern Command spokesman Natalia Humanyuk said the information ban still applies to the counterattack in the south. In general, however, the Russian army continued to retreat and in many cases sank in the marshy areas of southern Ukraine and fell prey to artillery and air forces. In the past 24 hours, the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine carried out 6 attacks on areas of concentration of troops and military equipment of the invaders and an air defense system. In addition, 2 enemy reconnaissance drones, Zala and Orlan-10, were shot down. Meanwhile, artillery launched 25 attacks on the Russian evacuation convoys. In the past 24 hours, 640 Russian soldiers have been removed from the battle along with 4 tanks, 11 armored vehicles, 14 artillery systems, an air defense system, and 8 troop and fuel transport vehicles. Overall, from February 24, 2022 to April 26, 188,410 Russian soldiers were eliminated from the battle. In addition, the Ukrainian army destroyed 3,692 Russian tanks, 7,162 armored vehicles, 2,877 artillery systems, 539 mass launch missile systems, 292 air defense systems, 308 aircraft, 294 helicopters, 2,440 tactical drones, 911 cruise missiles, 18 warships, 5,792 troop and fuel transport vehicles, and 352 special equipment units. 3. Mysterious explosion in Crimea as Russia prepares for Ukraine attack. Newsweek had a report titled Mysterious Crimea Explosion as Russia Prepares for Ukraine Assault, which translates to Mysterious Explosion in Crimea as Russia Prepares for an Invasion of Ukraine. Local media reported that a Crimean resident was killed in a mysterious explosion in the southeast of the Black Sea Peninsula. Baza, a Russian telegram channel that regularly posts information on domestic security issues, reported on Monday that a 45-year-old resident in the Crimean city of Alushta was killed after being hit by a device. Military explosion near the coast. As Russia prepares for an anticipated Ukrainian counteroffensive, its forces have fortified the Black Sea Peninsula that was illegally annexed by President Vladimir Putin in 2014. Beaches in Crimea are believed to be closed to swimmers as Russian forces dug trenches and prepared new defensive positions there. Area. There have also been reports that the Russians are burying mines all over the peninsula. Residents of Alushta heard an explosion on the evening of April 23. Investigators who arrived at the scene found the 45-year-old man's body about 15 meters from the sea. The cause of death was an unidentified explosive device that exploded, Baza reported. Russian state news agency RIA Novosti reported on Monday that a resident was exploded by ammunition between the cities of Alushta and Sudak and he died. The media outlet cited emergency services as saying the ammunition was likely manufactured during World War II. Russian authorities have not yet commented on the incident. Newsweek has reached out to the Russian Foreign Ministry by email for comment. A yellow terror threat level has been in place in parts of Crimea since April 11, 2022, weeks after Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began. Russian forces have fortified the region amid fears of a Ukrainian advance. Reports of explosions on the peninsula are becoming more frequent. In the early hours of Monday, Crimea was rocked by explosions. The Moscow-backed governor of Sevastopol, Mikhail Razvozayev, said on his Telegram channel that Russia's Black Sea Fleet repelled an attack by 2 drones or 2 unmanned boats at sea. As Russia prepares for a possible Ukrainian attack, tensions appear to be growing on the annexed peninsula, with the search for saboteurs possibly intensifying, according to the Center for National Resistance. Ukrainian family. The center says random spot checks are becoming more frequent on the streets of Crimea. In the temporarily invaded Crimea, the enemy continues to intensify measures to identify members of the Ukrainian resistance forces. In particular, apartments on the peninsula belonging to people they suspected of being disloyal were ransacked. Searches were also carried out without the owner present. Meanwhile, military parades traditionally scheduled for May 9 to mark Victory Day, Russia's annual celebration of defeating Nazi Germany in World War II, have been cancelled. Abandoned in Crimea amid security concerns. 4. Intelligence Bulletin of the UK Department of Defence Intelligence. In the latest intelligence report, the Intelligence Service of the UK Ministry of Defence informed about the situation in the city of Bakhmut amid untrue rumours of the Russians. Intense close combat continues in the western districts of the disputed town of Bakhmut in Donetsk Oblast. A key development over the past week has been fighting on the outskirts of the town, particularly near the village of Kromov, as Ukraine seeks to maintain control of its 0506 supply route. Other Ukrainian resupply options into Bakhmut could be complicated by muddy conditions on unpaved roads. With the town now under attack for over 11 months, Ukraine's Bakhmut defenses have now been integrated as part of a much deeper defense zone, which includes the western town of Chasiv Yar. 5. Russian Foreign Ministry expels a Moldovan diplomat. The Russian Foreign Ministry is expelling a Moldovan diplomat in what it sees as retaliation for the expulsion of a Russian diplomat in Moldova last week. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said Moldova's ambassador to Moscow had been summoned to announce the expulsions, as well as to protest what the ministry called unfriendly steps towards Russia and regular anti-Russian statements from Chisinau. Moldova's foreign minister, Nicu Popescu, called the move hostile and said it was the latest phase in decades of Russian efforts to stifle Moldova's growth as an independent country. Last week, Moldova said it was deporting a Russian diplomat, following his tensions with Moldovan border forces, who refused entry to a Russian politician in the region at the airport. Chisinau. Moldovan police say the governor of Tatarstan, Rustem Minikhanov, wants to visit Moldova to increase support for a pro-Russian candidate in regional elections. When the border guards refused entry, Minikhanov called the Russian embassy and the embassy employee about to be deported uttered threats to the Moldovan border guards. Moldova, which applied to join the European Union last year along with neighboring Ukraine, has repeatedly accused Russia of trying to destabilize the country, which Moscow denies. 6. The Kremlin has denied allegations that Putin's visit to Kherson is a fake Putin. The Kremlin has denied what it says is a lie that President Vladimir Putin used a stunt double for the 70-year-old leader and that he spent most of his time sheltering in a nuclear defense bunker. Core. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov listed what he said was fabricated about Russia in a speech addressing the country's history since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the cause of the Ukraine war, and the alleged betrayal of Western society. Speaking at a conference in Moscow, Peskov said, "You may have heard that the president has a lot of substitutes working for him as he sits in the bunker. Another lie. See for yourself what our president is. No matter, he was always, and now, extremely active. Those who work alongside the president have a hard time keeping up with him." He added, "His energy can only be envied. His health can be the wish of many. Of course, the president doesn't sit in any bunkers. This is also a lie." The Kremlin has repeatedly denied speculation that Putin, Russia's supreme leader since 1999, is seriously ill. During a state visit to Moscow last month, Chinese President Xi Jinping told Putin he believed voters would support the Russian leader once again in presidential elections next year. 2024, Putin has yet to say whether he will seek another term. Dmitry Peskov's statement appeared to be in response to an accusation by Igor Girkin, a former commander of Russia's Federal Security Service, or FSB for short, that Kherson's visit had just been announced by the Kremlin. Last week's surprise was made by a substitute for Putin. 7. European Commission sends another $1.65 billion in funding to Ukraine. President Ursula von der Leyen said the European Commission is providing an additional €1.5 billion, or $1.65 billion, in funding for Ukraine. Today, we will provide an additional €1.5 billion to Ukraine under our annual macro-financial support package, she said above. We will continue to help Ukraine fend off Russian aggression, keep its institutions and infrastructure up and running, and carry out important reforms. The Russo-Ukrainian War marked the first time the European Union has provided lethal weapons to a third country, underscoring the level of threat it believes Moscow poses to its security. Other important supporters of Ukraine are the United States and the United Kingdom. In early February, the bloc announced it would inject an additional €545 million, or $575 million, into a military aid fund worth €3.6 billion, or $3.8 billion, to Ukraine. The military assistance measures taken by the European Union are worth about €13 billion, of which €4.6 billion have been mobilized under the European Peace Facility. 8. Situation in Kupiansk after the museum attack. Ola Syniehubov, governor of Kharkiv, appeared on television in Ukraine and gave an update via telegram on the situation in Kupiansk following the attack on the museum earlier today. Rescue operations are taking place at the site of the missile attack in central Kupiansk, he said. Unfortunately, the woman lying under the rubble died. Emergency crews just pulled her body out of the wreckage. According to our information, another woman may still be lying under the rubble. Special services are doing everything they can to find her. No military facilities near the museum building were hit by enemy S-300 missiles. The enemy is deliberately hitting civilian infrastructure and terrorizing civilians. Work on identifying collaborators is ongoing in the region. Currently, prosecutors' offices manage more than 1,000 such cases. Some of them have been taken to court. Anyone found guilty of collaborating with the other party will receive an appropriate punishment. Russia has repeatedly denied attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. As of February 2022, the United Nations recorded 6,596 civilian deaths and 11,684 injuries in territory controlled by the Ukrainian government. 9. Drones destroy the Russian surveillance system at the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station. During a press conference at the Kyiv Press Center on Wednesday morning, April 26, Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar said that units of the 59th Mechanized Brigade destroyed a Russian surveillance complex on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River. In Kherson by drone. One of the units of the brigade destroyed a Russian surveillance complex located at the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station at a distance of more than 6 kilometers from the location of this unit. One video shows a drone operator watching surveillance video, believed to be from another drone. Smoke rises from the upper floor of a building at the power plant. The video also shows the state of the road, Russian vehicles fleeing before the Ukrainian counteroffensive are struggling for traction in the muddy sea. Deputy Minister Hanna Maliar commented that, as you can see, the weather conditions have not yet allowed the equipment and troops to operate at full capacity. Therefore, there will be a general counterattack, but it takes time and conditions. Please be patient. 10. Zelensky said more than 60 Ukrainian cultural sites were destroyed by the Russians. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that more than 60 museums and galleries in different parts of our country have also been destroyed or damaged by the invaders since the invasion began. He said 2 women were killed in Russia's attack with an S-300 missile on the Kupiansk Museum in the Kharkiv region. This town was about 10 kilometers from the front line. He also said that a church was destroyed by a Russian attack in the southern Kherson region. This church became one of hundreds of churches and chapels destroyed by Russian airstrikes, he said. In his address to his compatriots on Tuesday night, President Zelensky also alleged that Russian forces had broken into the home of a Tatar activist, Abdurshit Zaporov, in Crimea. He is one of the representatives of the Crimean Tatar national movement, a human rights activist, a citizen of Ukraine. I don't know where he is now, what is happening to him. 11. Russia says it may suspend ban on deployment of medium and short-range nuclear missiles. Vladimir Ermakov, head of the Russian Foreign Ministry's Non-Proliferation Department, said Russia could end the ban on the deployment of medium and short-range missiles on the ground. Ermakov believes that Russia will only continue to comply with its ban depending on the scope of the U.S. missile deployment, the characteristics and the ability to reach the Asia-Pacific region of the U.S. missiles. In particular, Russia's willingness to continue to comply with the unilateral ban on the deployment of short and medium-range missiles on the ground in certain areas will fundamentally depend on the specific parameters of the range. Firing of American missiles, Ermakov said. But even now we can say with confidence that the destabilizing military programs of the United States and its allies are making our ban all the more fragile, both in Asia, Pacific and Europe. Some background information. The United States withdrew from the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty with Russia in 2019. The agreement, signed in 1987 by U.S. President Ronald Reagan and Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev, restricted both countries from deploying both short-range and intermediate land-based ballistic missiles, cruise missiles and rocket launchers that can be used to carry nuclear or conventional payloads. Then U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper said the U.S. withdrawal from the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty with Russia in 2019 was a direct result of Russia's repeated violations of the treaty over many years and through multiple presidential administrations. Due to the decision of the United States, Russia also announced its withdrawal from the agreement. But Russia has vowed to continue its ban on the deployment of such weapons. At the time, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov said, "We have invited the US and other NATO countries to assess the possibility of declaring a ban on the deployment of medium and short-range equipment similar to ours already, the same ban that Vladimir Putin has announced, saying that Russia will refrain from deploying these systems once we get them unless American equipment is deployed in certain areas." NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg dismissed Russia's offer of a moratorium as unreliable because he said Russia had deployed such missiles for many years. In February, Russian President Vladimir Putin said he was suspending his country's participation in the New START nuclear arms reduction treaty. That treaty placed limits on the number of deployed intercontinental-range nuclear weapons that both the United States and Russia could possess. 12. Lithuania's parliament on Tuesday voted in favor of allowing border forces to force migrants back. Lithuania's parliament on Tuesday voted in favor of allowing border forces to force the return of migrants who entered the country illegally. Lithuania is bordered by European Union countries such as Latvia and Poland, as well as Belarus and the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad. In 2021, Latvia declared a state of emergency and Lithuania began planning to build barbed wire fences to prevent record numbers of migrants crossing their borders from Belarus, amid Minsk announcements. Are using the arrivals as leverage on the European Union countries to reverse sanctions. Authorities in the Baltic states and Poland have accused the Belarusian leader, Alexander Lukashenko, of orchestrating the border crossings in the form of mixed war. 13. A heated controversy broke out at the United Nations. A bitter controversy erupted at the United Nations when Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov used Russia's time as the rotating chair of the UN Security Council to convene a meeting to justify the invasion of Ukraine. U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield called Russia the hypocritical convener of the meeting to justify the illegal, gratuitous, and unnecessary war in Ukraine that hits the heart of the Charter. United Nations and all the values we hold dear. Britain's ambassador to the United Nations, Barbara Woodward, said the countries had seen the idea of what Russian multilateralism means to the world, a trampling of the UN Charter. And a war that has brought unimaginable suffering to Ukraine and is also a big disaster for Russia. The 27-member European Union called Russia's efforts to present itself as a defender of the UN Charter and multilateralism ridiculous, and said Russia disdained more than just the UN Charter. United Nations but also UN General Assembly resolutions calling for Russia to withdraw its troops. But Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergey Lavrov, defended what Moscow called its special military operation, reiterating accusations that Ukraine was promoting Nazi activities and banning language. Russian language and culture, and NATO is planning to expand into Ukraine. However, he stressed that it's not all about Ukraine, but what he calls a Western plan to take advantage of the Ukrainian government in hopes of weakening Russia. We cannot look at the Ukraine issue in isolation from the geopolitical context. It is about how international relations will continue to be shaped through the establishment of a healthy consensus on the basis of a balance of interests, or through strong and volatile progress of Washington's hegemony. At the meeting, the United Nations Secretary-General and the ambassadors of the United States, Britain, France, and their allies pointed out the basic principle of the United Nations Charter, which requires all countries to support the sovereignty, integrity, and sovereignty of the United Nations. Territory and political independence of each country, something that Russia violated by invading Ukraine and illegally annexing some areas. The permanent representative of the United Nations and China's ambassador to the agency, Zhang Jun, refused to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He said vaguely before the council, "The world is standing at a crossroads in history. Humanity is facing unprecedented global challenges. The acts of hegemony and bullying are causing great harm to the world. Politics is creating massive divisions and confrontations. Upholding the UN Charter has become more urgent and important than ever. It is understandable that he is criticizing Russia, but it is also understandable that he is criticizing the United States." 14. The head of the United Nations stated that the risk of conflict between great powers was at historic high. The head of the United Nations and representatives from Western countries fiercely argued with Russia's top diplomat as he chaired a United Nations meeting on Monday, accusing Moscow of violating its charter. United Nations when it attacked Ukraine and invaded part of its territory. Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergey Lavrov, reacted by defending his country's military action and accusing the United States and its allies of undercutting the global diplomacy that is the cornerstone of the United Nations, established to prevent a third world war. Lavrov repeated a frequent Russian claim that the war in Ukraine was a proxy war against Russia. However, he failed to answer questions from U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, who asserted that the war would end today, right now, if Russia ceased fire and withdrew its troops from Ukraine. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called the cooperation between the 193 member states of the United Nations the beating heart and the guiding vision of the organization, and he warned the Security Council that global cooperation is at its greatest strain since the founding of the United Nations in 1945 on the ashes of the Second World War. He said tensions between the great powers were at historic highs, and the risk of conflict was due to carelessness or miscalculation, pointing out first and foremost the war in Ukraine.